Welcome to Psychological Explorations with Dr. Michael Axelman and Daniela and John. Today we'll be exploring a chapter from Helm Stierlin's book, Separating Parents and Adolescents, Individuation in the Family. The chapter is entitled Centripetal and Centrifugal Forces in the Adolescent Separation Drama. Helm Stierlin, a German who passed recently, back in 2021, was one of the first psychoanalysts to really merge and bring together the ideas of psychoanalysis and family systems theory. Today we'll be examining these forces and how they play out in the adolescent drama of separating and individuating. He identifies the concept of transactional modes. These modes reflect the interplay and/or relative dominance of centripetal and centrifugal pushes between generations. In the intergenerational interplay, the transactional modes operate as covert organizing transactional background to more overt and specific child-parent interactions. These modes are transitive and reciprocal. Transitive, expressing an action which passes from the agent to an object, from the subject which does to the object on which it is done. They are transitive in that they denote the active molding of an offspring who is still immature, dependent, and hence remains captive to parental influences. To this stronger reality, the child must adapt or perish. These modes are reciprocal in the sense that there is always a two-way exchange. He identifies three modes, binding, delegating, and expelling. And these were drawn from a study of a sample of over 200 runaways, which were involved in a whole family study. And he identified these three groups in that study. The binding reflected mainly the non-runaways and abortive runaways, including lonely, schizoid runaways in which the centripetal forces would dominate, right? These children had a very hard time exiting the family. So binding was operative, and there was rarely any running away, and if there was, they hardly made it out the door, maybe half a block down. The delegating group reflected mainly in crisis runaways. Centripetal and centrifugal forces dominate with the adolescent placed on a long leash of loyalty, driven by the parent's agenda. So there's ambivalence in the delegating. And the expelling group reflected mainly in the casual runaways, with enduring neglect, rejection, with the children pushed into premature and foreclosing autonomy with weak loyalty bonds. Centrifugal forces dominate here as these children are expelled from the family system. A closer look at binding. Binding chiefly in those disturbed adolescents who did not run away or who were abortive runaways. They tended to avoid peers, showing no interest in peers with fears of being unmasked and ridiculed, and they lacked relational skills to be successful in the peer group. Binding occurs on the three levels: exploitation of the child's elementary needs and satisfaction, food and pleasure, what the analysts refer to as the id satisfactions, and cognitive processes is primarily involved in colonizing the thinking, where the parent's thinking takes over the child's thinking, and the child doesn't have a way of differentiating very well, individuating. And the superego, the loyalty binding. All that I've done for you, how could you leave? A closer look at the affective, the id type binding. Here we typically find a mother who tries to give her child all the love she herself missed as a child. She now recruits her child and gives to him as she had needed to be given to, unable to see what the child needs in his own right, not allowed to experience and define his parents' feelings for what they are: hostile and rejecting. Cognitive binding. She cognitively binds her child when she imposes on him her own definition of his feelings, needs, or intentions. Thereby she substitutes her one for the child's regulatory and discriminating ego. She misdefines the child to himself. Mother trains her child to perceive her as loving, whereas in reality she is hostile and rejecting, or at least ambivalent. The child is mystified about what he feels, needs, and wants. The binding operates primarily through the withholding of meaning. To the runaway inwardly indicates a deflection of cognitive growth into the buildup of the fantasy world, which replaces the real world of living peers and alternate adults, and becomes the valued reality in these children's lives. Very lonely runaways who nonetheless seem to be held on a long leash by their parents. Through the overuse of fantasy, they appear both separated and unseparated, living in their own world and that of their parents, and yet not following the normal separation course of adolescence. Kind of suspended. This overuse of fantasy as a defense to manage the anxiety that's inherent in this developmental stage. Binding through loyalty exploitation. Adolescents who are chiefly bound on this level are likely to experience any thought of, not to mention attempt at, separation as the number one crime, for which only the harshest punishment will do. These parents convey sometimes overtly, but most often covertly, that they have totally sacrificed themselves for their child, that they have lived only for him. They need him to supply their life blood, for leaving now is tantamount to the murder of the parents, prone to suffer maximal primitive breakaway guilt. He can then resolve this conflict only by either destroying himself or ruefully returning to the parental orbit. Self-destruction appeared characteristic of certain abortive runaways in the lonely schizoid group. The mode of delegating. Parents with ongoing unresolved ambivalence. Parents who react to their own developmental crisis with ongoing unresolved ambivalence and conflict seem bent on consolidating existing relations and jobs, yet also seem compelled to make new starts. They need to bind their children, but also to send them out. They want to benefit from them, but also be left alone and unhampered. By making their child into the delegate, they send him out, that is, encourage him to leave the family orbit. But also, while sending him out, they hold on to him. He both takes it upon himself to cope with parental ambivalence and makes himself into their reconciling agent. So the major missions of the delegate, there's id-based mission, the thrill provision for the parent, which fulfills a reparative function. The child who goes to parties and drinks, has encounters with other people, and then brings these stories back to the mother to fulfill this function. The ego-based missions, helping task-focused, which many children do in a healthy family, have certain things to do to help the family, and this is moving beyond that. Support the embattled parent. Be the parent's experimenter. Support parents' fragile ego. And the superego-based missions. The delegate must fulfill parents' own unrealized aspiration. The delegate must externalize, embody parents' disowned badness. The delegate must alleviate the parent's conscience and atone for the parent's disowned badness. So these missions related to the superego, loyalty aspects. The adolescent is burdened with his parents' exaggerated and frustrated wishes to become an actor, scientist, physician, financial tycoon. Alternately, he will be delegated to provide a living contrast, to be bad. Wherever runaway adolescents let themselves be enlisted as living screens for their parents' punitive projections, they serve this self-observing superego function. Invite punishment for their parents' disowned bad impulses. In closing, the mode of expelling. Okay, this is one that typically does not come in for treatment, right? The parents are not interested in getting help on how to connect with their child in these families more typically. The crucial element here is that parents, in trying to solve their crisis, come to view their adolescent children as hindrances. These parents expel children because they do not want these children. Parents rebuff and neglect their children. You are expendable. The earlier you leave the home, the better. They may run away early and casually, without much ado, lack of concern and involvement. Anger and hatred are usually shallow and aroused by immediate situational frustrations. What is overriding is the parent's enduring wish to get rid of the child. Thank you for joining us for our presentation today on Helm Stierlin's Family Forces. Join us in the second part for our discussion. Thank you.